I think our expectation is to be able to go into a grocery store and buy a pound of ground beef for a couple of dollars or whatever it is. Our cheap meat has these hidden social costs that aren't being accounted for.
You know what? Meat's not cheap. What we do is we externalize all the costs onto other people, into future generations. And if you would take your typical McDonald's cheeseburger, which, you know, $1.50, right? Well, there are probably at least that many costs that get externalized on the environment, on people who work on those farms, on future generations who are going to have to suffer, you know, from antibiotic resistance, so on and so forth. So no, it's not cheap. It is not cheap by any means. It's just that you don't pay the full price of that beef when you go to McDonald's.
Most of us aren't exposed to this. We don't see it. We don't directly experience it. It's hidden from us.
We don't have any experience with farms, right? We're essentially taking people off the farms, put them in large urban centers, and as a result of that, we don't have any contact with our food anymore. So as long as we get our food, a steady supply, it tastes good, and it's cheap, we're okay with that, right? And once you allow that critical distance to occur, you essentially lose oversight over the conditions under which your food is raised. So factory farms are very easy. They are.
It's being kept at the margins isn't so much to protect us from our squeamishness, but is to prevent our having the full moral reaction that we might otherwise have, you know, in terms of the treatment of these living creatures.
You know, as long as it's kind of hidden away, tucked in the hillside where you don't have to see it. I mean, it doesn't have to raise any kind of moral revulsion on your part. It's just, it is what it is, right? You just forget about it.
The very fact that it's so well shielded from us at least suggests that our ability to tolerate it is probably contingent to a large degree on its being mostly invisible to us.
There's I think, very little way to get around the issue that when you eat factory farmed meat, you're essentially supporting an industry that causes just an unimaginable amount of suffering on a daily basis, okay?
Many are concerned about how these creatures are treated, and that intensive farming methods tend to be highly unnatural with regard to the standard life of animals, and that many suspect they impose an enormous burden in terms of pain and suffering on these creatures.
And I guarantee you, if you would ever go into, let's say, a large hog confinement facility and just what you smell and see what you see, and imagine what it would be like to be confined for the entirety of your life in this tiny little stall, you would have a visceral emotional reaction to that. And part of it would be disgust. Part of it would be, you know, I've really probably got to do something about this.
Each of us is a moral agent. We identify or hold certain values or principles that we then apply in our choices.
That's one of the easiest things to do in terms of decreasing the amount of suffering in the world, is to essentially say no to factory farmed meat.
I do suggest that they're engaging in behavior that has serious moral dimensions, and I do also suspect that the vast majority of us don't really pay very much attention to that, and so that we're at least complicit in an activity that has potentially severe moral consequences, and yet we don't treat it as the kind of decision that has that significance.
Is not partaking of factory farmed meat morally superior to actually engaging in that? Yes, I think so. I do. I do. It seems to me pretty easy. It's a good call, right? Reduce your consumption of meat, go vegetarian if you can. I think it's very consistent with the best of philosophical as well as Christian ethics. I think you've got to leave the broader consequences to the powers that be. What you need to be worried about is yourself and being faithful to what you believe, for example, as a Christian, the gospel calls you to do. And you do that. And if your friends don't want to do that, fine. That's their business, right? You can't change that. What you can change and what you have control over is your behavior. And so that, at least in my mind, is critically important. So if I change my behavior and it doesn't make one bit of difference, who cares? If you're really striving to be the best person you can be morally, say no to factory farmed meat. You'll be better off for it. Other people will be better. The animals will be better off for it. Yeah. It's something of a historical aberration. It's an experiment that I think has failed miserably. And at some point we have to say, for a number of different reasons, we just need not to do this anymore. There's not much going for factory farming, really, trust me.
I smoke to the bass, and the bass says we wait. So I smoke an old cigar.